What can we do? Like maybe what's one or two things that we can do as podcasters to make sure that our show is entertaining for ourselves, actually, because that was fun for me, but
Right.
but really for our listener.
I think there's something like that in the very beginning, that the listener that's going to be comical, that has a chance to be comical. In the very beginning of the episode, it does what it does immediately is for the guest that you may not know this guest, but you want them on, and they're talented people. I've seen this happen many times, so many times in my podcast, where they come on and they're kind of like standoffish, but then we get in them fast five, all of a sudden it disarms them. They're lightened up. They think, oh, okay, they're loose now. This is not going to be one of those type of shows, one of those same interviews, right? So anything you can do that takes somebody, that takes their mind and starts to interest the actual talent that you have on, all of a sudden they're more into they want to answer any question you have, and they answer it with sincerity and with knowledge, because they don't want, you got to think about certain people. Like even me, I've done 200, I'm not even famous, but I've done 200 interviews this year, right? On podcasts. Like that. So there's people way bigger than me. Like, I had Bert Kreischer on my show, and he has his own podcast. He's one of the biggest podcasts, and he did my show. And the very first thing we did was, of course, the Fast Five, but we also talked about how I got him on the show. It wasn't because I knew him, right? It was so hilarious for the people to hear. And I told him, I said, read some of the messages that I sent you on Instagram. And he read those messages, and we were just rolling because years ago, I asked him, because he followed me years ago, and I followed him back, and I followed him first, and then he followed me back because of a comment I left or something. And I started at that point, I said, all right, well, you're going to be on the show then. So I started messaging him, and I said, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast. And he goes, oh yeah, definitely. And that was, a year before he was on the show. And so then I kept asking every month. I was like, hey, we're booking for this day, this month. And he goes, and he wouldn't answer. And then eventually he would answer and say, hey, let's wait till I'm in Nashville, yada, yada, yada. And I said, okay. So then he came to Nashville, and I said, hey, you're in Nashville. Need to get you on this podcast. We're going to love it. It's going to be great. And then he never responded. So we went on, and then eventually I just started making jokes about the whole thing. And I said stuff like, here's your monthly Marty message. We need you on the podcast. And then he said in that episode, he goes, it felt like I was getting to know my neighbor through these messages, and I think that's something else that people are, that they don't know how to do things tactfully, where if you can do it with comedy, you can keep asking over and over. And if you make somebody laugh through the way your tactics of getting them on the show, they're probably going to do your show. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and that's the same way with the interview. Because even when we got to the interview, Bert had never spoke to me face to face. We had never looked at each other, but I immediately disarmed him he's a comedian. So I immediately disarmed him by making him laugh. And it was a great interview, and it always is. We just have fun. That's the main thing, is have fun. Don't be nervous. Do your research. One thing I hate about podcasting is, I get this every time, and I don't tell people this. You didn't do it, so I'm thankful for that. People you'll come on their show and you'll say, now tell people about yourself. That's the worst thing that you can do, because you're supposed to already know about the guest. So it's your job to introduce the guest. So I always prepare an introduction to the guest. Now I always tell myself, I want to introduce you, and then we'll get into the Fast Five. We'll get into the interview. So right off the top, the people that are listening know exactly who this is. This is the highlights of their life, what they've done, not their life, but the highlight of their career. And they don't have to go through. We don't have to spend an hour now letting them introduce themselves, because nobody really likes to talk about themselves or brag about themselves. If they're people like me, I don't like to go through all that, and I don't like to brag, first of all. So it's not like something I enjoy. Okay, well, I've done this. So like, I think that more podcasters need to say, okay, I'm going to have this guy on. I need to know about this guy, and I'm going to introduce him myself. Or I won't get to know him and I'll just get to know him in the show by asking questions. That's another way. And that's fine too. But when they say, tell us a little bit about yourself, that's the question that every rookie podcaster asks. Tell us about yourself. So I would say, don't ask that question.